How do you become the most famous artist on Earth and at the same time feel like the loneliest person in the world? How do you survive a childhood full of fear, humiliation, and control while millions of people watch your smile? And how does the life of a man who gave his all to the public but lost himself completely along the way end? Here is a shocking story with a horrific ending. Michael Jackson was on stage before he was born. As the youngest member of the Jackson 5, he thrilled audiences with his voice, his energy, and his purity. But what the audience didn't see was that behind the scenes, Michael was forced into perfection under the guidance of a father who didn't coach but terrorized. Joe Jackson, his father, beat him, belittled him, and called him ugly, fat, and stupid if he made one mistake. There was no warmth and no security, just pure pressure and loneliness. And what did Michael do all this time? Keep smiling for the camera because no one was allowed to know. Only when he stood on his own 2 feet did he become a megastar. Albums like Thriller, Bad and Dangerous broke records. His dancing, his style, his voice, everything became legendary. But the bigger he became to the outside world, the smaller he began to feel himself. Michael had his face changed. He bleached his skin through a skin condition and cosmetic surgery, slowly turning into a man who no longer recognized himself in the mirror. He sought solace in toys, in children, in a fantasy world called Neverland, not out of perversion, but out of longing for the childhood he was never meant to have. Yet that safe world eventually turned against him. Accusations of child abuse haunted him for years, from lawsuits and investigations to media hypes and accusations. He was never convicted, but his image was damaged beyond repair. And if you think that was it, you are wrong, because as the public divided, Michael became more and more distant from everything and everyone. He used heavy medication to sleep, to function, to relax, but mostly to escape reality. And as a result, the greatest tragedy ever occurred, shocking everyone worldwide. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died of a propofol overdose, a narcotic that is only used in hospitals and which was nota bene administered by his own doctor to help him sleep one night well. Michael Jackson became a legend, but underneath was a child who never got the chance to just be a child. Only when he was finally quiet did the world only realize how much he had been screaming all along. His life ended in a storm of media coverage and speculation, but what follows is the story of a woman whose passing went almost unnoticed. And that is precisely why it is so poignant. If you are loved by millions but no one knows that you are disappearing, is that life? What if you smile for the camera every day, while your body is silently being eaten away from the inside? Michelle Thomas had something special. She radiated warmth, had perfect timing for comedy, and knew how to make every supporting character unforgettable. In the 1990s, she became known as Myra Monkhouse, the smart, sweet girl who was hopelessly in love with Steve Urkel in Family Matters. Earlier, she played Justine, Theo's girlfriend in The Cosby Show. She was loved on set, not just for her looks, but for who she was, a woman who worked with grace, respect, and dedication. She sang, hosted, and seemed ready to take the next step in her career. But behind her smile, something terrible was happening. In 1997, Michelle began experiencing severe abdominal pain. Tests revealed that she was suffering from a rare form of stomach cancer. The disease was aggressive and, to everyone's horror, had already spread. In addition, this rare form was a type of cancer that was difficult to treat. Nevertheless, she continued to work as long as she could and, remarkably, told almost no one. Only when her body began to swell, she lost weight, and the pain became too severe did she withdraw. She underwent several operations, lost her spleen, and was nursed for months. And as if things couldn't get any worse, her father died that same year. Michelle remained brave. but her body gave up. On December 23, 1998, Michelle Thomas died in her mother's arms. She was only 29 years old. Her death came as a shock to many. Not because she was a famous actress, but because no one had seen how much she had been hiding all that time. Where Michelle was buried in silence, the following story reveals a cesspool that had been carefully concealed for years, a past that no one dared to mention aloud. Why did one of the biggest child stars of the 1980s suddenly disappear from view? And why does Hollywood to this day refuse to talk about what happened to him, even after his friend's death? He was young, famous, and all over TV. But what hideous secret did this star carry with him all these years? Corey Feldman starred in films that are childhood memories for many. The Goonies, Stand By Me, The Lost Boys. Together with his friend Corey Haim, he formed the golden duo of the 1980s, loved everywhere, always in the foreground. Money, attention, fame. It was perfect, or did it seem perfect? Behind that smile was something no one wanted to see. While fans cheered and studios made millions, Corey became more and more distant from himself. The innocence he started with disappeared. His behavior changed, he became rebellious, closed off, lost from his career from TV, and became estranged from himself and his friend. Everyone thought, it must be the pressure, the child star syndrome, but no one really asked. And even that wasn't the real problem. Only years later, when the cameras had long since stopped rolling and his name was almost forgotten, did Corey dare to say what was really going on. He had been sexually abused by men from the top. With him, it was limited to groping, but with Haim, it was different. He was really raped. Haim was raped when he was barely 11 years old. What he and Haim had experienced as a child behind closed doors is beyond description. For years, Corey Feldman has cried out about the alleged existence of a pedophile network in Hollywood. He told about powerful figures within the film industry, about what they did, who they were, and how long it had been going on. Not with one child, not once. In his new documentary, My Truth, The Rape of Two Coreys, he now names names. But Hollywood looks away just as it did then. So his friend Haim eventually committed suicide because he was driven beyond despair, broken by a youth that was not a youth. And while he continued to fight to be heard, the life of a TV daughter who could never again play the role of her life faded away. How could a famous teenage girl from one of the most popular TV series of the 1980s suddenly disappear? Why was she in the news years later? Not because of her work, but because of something no one saw coming. And what happened to her silently when the applause had long since died down? In the 1980s, everyone knew her face. Dana Plato became world famous as Kimberly Drummond in the iconic sitcom Different Strokes. She was charming, bubbly, sweet, someone everyone loved. Every week, America sat ready to watch her laugh. But when the series stopped, everything changed. Dana, just out of her teens, stopped getting new roles. Afterwards, she acted in cheaply produced films and a few soft porn movies. But her career dried up, and the attention disappeared, and what remained was confusion and silence. She struggled with money, with drugs, and with life after fame. She tried to reinvent herself, but the industry that had built her up had also completely written her off. And then the unimaginable happened. What no one could have ever imagined or even imagined took place. In 1991, Dana Plato, with sunglasses and a gun, robbed a video store for less than $200. Not like a scene in a movie, no, this was real. And what happened next? Hours later, she called the police herself, turning herself in. Once one of the most beloved girls on American television was now a headline. A shame because she lived her last years in an RV, homeless, penniless, and addicted. And the most horrific ending? On May 8th, 1999, she took a handful of pills and never woke up again. She was only 34 years old. Dana Plato made the world laugh for years, but no one wondered how she was really doing. And when the cameras stopped rolling, no one was watching. Her end felt tragic but inevitable. But just when you think things couldn't get any worse, we have a TV miracle, blonde and innocent, but with a future that slowly crumbled away. How did a child star from one of the most popular sitcoms of the 1980s turn into a man who repeatedly ran afoul of the police? What happened to the blonde boy who once mesmerized millions of viewers? And why did he suddenly disappear from the spotlight? You're not going to believe why he surfaced years later as an obscure figure. In the 1980s, Rick Schroder was a name you encountered everywhere. He broke through at a young age in the Oscar-winning film The Champ, and then became wildly popular as the charming and affluent young Ricky Stratton in the hit series Silver Spoons. America adored him because he was young, handsome, successful, and he seemed destined for a long, famous, and successful career. But there was something the public didn't see. That was that Rick was increasingly struggling to make the transition from child star to adult actor. After the sitcom, things remained quiet. Small roles came, but the magic seemed gone. And slowly, off-screen, his life began to rip. Rick struggled with himself for years. There were rumors of aggressive behavior, but what happened next was a shock to everyone. He was arrested several times, including for domestic violence. His marriage was on the rocks and his image collapsed. The cheerful, innocent Rick of old had become unrecognizable. He later resurfaced on social media, but not as an actor. No, it was worse. With unbridled anger, conspiracy theories, and tirades that stunned viewers, he emerged as an extreme activist. He blamed the world for everything that went wrong. Rick Schroder grew up in the spotlight, but no one showed him how to live in the shadows. And sometimes, when you lose yourself too young, you never quite find who you really should have become. As his glory faded, here is a shocking comparison. A young girl who, at the age of 10, got what she ultimately slowly destroyed her. She won an Oscar at 10, stood beaming in front of millions of people. But what happened to her after that will break your heart. She was still a child when Hollywood treated her like an adult, then dropped her rock hard. Tatum O'Neal was a miracle. In 1973, she shone as a child opposite her own father in the film Paper Moon. She was sharp, vulnerable, but also brilliant because what she showed on screen was so impressive that no one else stood a chance. At the age of 10, she received an Oscar and a standing ovation, resulting in the youngest winner ever. But what no one saw was that Tatum was all alone, very lonely. Her mother struggled with addiction, and her father, Ryan O'Neal, was distant, domineering, and emotionally unreachable. He gave her the role of her life, but was unable to protect her when things got quiet. Tatum searched for footing in a world that loved only her success. At 13, she started drinking not because she wanted to rebel, but because it was the only way to numb the emptiness. And what happened next? In the years that followed, she lost herself in heroin and cocaine. She created a deafening silence. She lost her children, her family, her career, and eventually even control of her own life. And then the horrific tragedy happened. In 2020, Tatum O'Neal was rushed to hospital after attempting suicide. She had tried to disappear but had failed. Tatum O'Neal was not born to break, but she was broken by a world that loved her talent instead of her heart. And when the lights went out on this young star, a man emerged who had everything: wealth, fame, frenzy. Someone who, sadly, couldn't keep it up this way. He was the highest paid actor on television, surrounded by luxury, millions in the bank, women by his side, and worldwide success. But what happened next, no one saw coming. His life derailed so badly that even Hollywood turned away from it. and the truth behind what he kept hidden for years will shock you. For years, Charlie Sheen dominated the screen in such films as Platoon, Wall Street, and especially in the hit series 2.5 Men. He was not only admired for his talent, but adored for his sassy charm. That edge of chaos that made him irresistible became not only his fortune, but also his downfall. His character in the series, Charlie Harper, was a rich, sex-addicted alcoholic who had a lick for everything. So what was the big secret that the public didn't know? The line between fiction and reality blurred as on-set problems began to pile up. Tardiness, drugging, he became uncontrollable. Production companies gave him one more chance, but Sheen, who thought he was untouchable, and that became fatal to him because then came the explosions. In 2011, he was fired from the series he made millions from, and then went wild in bizarre interviews calling himself a magician with tiger blood. On social media, he spewed anger, insults, and engaged in self-aggrandizement. Everyone watched breathlessly. This was not an acting performance. This was a man falling apart live. But the real breaking point came in 2015. At an unexpected press conference, Sheen revealed that he had been HIV positive for 4 years. 4 years during which he had led people around him to believe that nothing was wrong. He paid millions in blackmail money and confessed that he had had sex with multiple partners, sometimes without protection, despite his diagnosis. On top of that, he was currently accused by Corey Feldman of sexual abuse. What followed was isolation, lawsuits, loss of job, money, and trust. Charlie Sheen, he thought he could handle anything, but in the end, fame turned out to be not his salvation, but his downfall. Oh, break. But she was broken by a world that loved her talent instead of her heart. Unfortunately, his fall became a media spectacle. But sometimes it's not addiction that breaks someone. Sometimes it's the man himself who causes his own downfall. How can someone who for years was seen as a hero on the silver screen turn into a man no one dares touch anymore? And how far does someone have to go before even Hollywood can't look away? Mel Gibson was once the perfect face of Hollywood. With his breakthrough in Mad Max, he established himself as an international action hero. But it was his role in Lethal Weapon that definitively turned him into a superstar. He was tough, funny, sensitive, the type of man both men and women looked up to. Not much later, he proved he could do more than act. As director of Braveheart, he won 2 Oscars and was seen by millions as the ultimate combination of talent, power, and vision. Behind the scenes, however, something else was growing. Mel had been known for years as a perfectionist, difficult and temperamental. But where colleagues first attributed that to his passion, it eventually turned out to be a symptom of something much deeper. He was addicted, had fluctuating moods, and a worldview that was increasingly derailed. The first blow came in 2006 when he was stopped under the influence and launched an anti-Semitic tirade against the officer who arrested him. The leaked statement caused a storm of criticism. Mel publicly apologized, but the seed of doubt was planted. Who was this man, really? You're not going to believe it, but this is the truth. That question got a much darker answer when audio recordings surfaced years later of private conversations between Mel and his then partner. What could be heard in them left little room for interpretation. Abusive cries, threats, humiliation, and unfiltered anger revealed who the true Mel was. No role or script, this was the raw reality that surfaced about Mel Gibson, the Oscar winner, the crowd favorite. Hollywood, which at first cautiously defended him, suddenly backed down en masse. Projects were stopped, acting jobs disappeared, and colleagues who once wanted to work with him publicly distanced themselves. He was no longer the hero, no longer the director, but the face of what goes wrong when power and anger go unpunished for too long. And just when you thought it couldn't get any more painful, along came a comedian who blew her entire career with one sentence that would haunt her forever. How was it possible for a woman who made millions of people laugh to turn into a national scandal that destroyed her entire career? This shocking story tells what happens when you spend years building everything up and in 1 second, with one click, lose it completely. In the 1990s, Roseanne Barr was a phenomenon. She broke all the rules. Her sitcom, Roseanne, was raw, honest, direct, and for the first time showed the ordinary working-class American family without trappings or Hollywood gloss. She was no average star. She was loud, political, unfiltered. And that's exactly why people loved her, because they thought she was real. But that being real would also eventually become her downfall. After years out of the spotlight, she returned. The 2018 reboot of Roseanne broke ratings again. It seemed like she had done the impossible, a comeback even bigger than her first breakthrough. Until things went wrong on May 29th, 2018. Roseanne posted a tweet in which she wrote, "If the Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes had a baby, VJ." By VJ, she meant former presidential advisor Valerie Jarrett, a daughter of 2 African-American parents and born in Iran, and former advisor to President Obama. The reaction was scathing, as within hours, Channel ABC pulled the plug on the show. The cast was furious. Everything she had built for decades disappeared in one day by one click. Roseanne claimed she was under the influence of sleeping pills, and that, as a result, she didn't know what she was doing. How is it possible? She apologized, but it was too late. She was live and mercilessly cast aside. Her downfall was explosive. But what goes wrong when a child star is already broken before she has even reached adulthood? How does one become the promise of a generation at 16, only to appear only in mugshots and courtrooms at 20? And why did the world watch as she slowly drowned before our eyes? Lindsay Lohan was only 11 years old when she became known worldwide with her double role in The Parent Trap. She was charming, funny, mature, and a natural. Hollywood had a new star, and this time the girl herself seemed comfortable with it. Her status exploded in the years that followed. Freaky Friday, Mean Girls, Herbie, Fully Loaded. Lindsay was no longer a promise, she was the star. She appeared on covers of every magazine, was followed by paparazzi, and was seen as the successor to Britney, Christina, and Hillary, but with more talent and more spunk. What the public didn't see was that Lindsay grew up in a family that ran on thrills rather than stability. An addicted father, a mother who exploited rather than protected her daughter. No safe home, no boundaries, and no one to say, stop. At 18, she was addicted to alcohol and cocaine. She crashed her cars, didn't appear on movie sets, did appear drunk in clubs, in headlines, and later, in court. Between 2007 and 2012, Lindsay was arrested or charged more than 20 times. Driving under the influence, theft, probation violation, failure to show up. Footage appeared of her laughing as she left the courthouse, as if she no longer knew how serious things had actually become. The media laughed at her, and, of course, Hollywood turned on her. She turned from a star into a walking warning. What no one seemed to understand was that all these years Lindsay was just a girl, exposed too young to everything a mature mind can already barely resist. She was losing herself, and no one to stop her. And when she finally did try to come back, by now the world was done with her. She got everything a teenager could dream of, except the chance to be a child. Lindsay became a symbol of derailment. But now comes the story of someone whose struggle was only heard when it was far too late. How is it possible that someone who made millions of people laugh could not even find the strength to stay awake himself? Why did his day start not with a smile, but with pills, sometimes 50 in a day? And how long could he keep up the facade before everything around him slowly collapsed, including his own body? For an entire generation, he was indispensable. As Chandler Bing in Friends, Matthew Perry became the face of self-deprecation, of sarcastic timing, of lightness at a time when life was tough enough. He became world-famous, stoned, and loved by literally hundreds of millions of viewers. But what no one saw was that behind the scenes, he completely broke down. By the time Friends was at its most popular, he himself was already deep into an addiction to Vicodin, Xanax, OxyContin, and alcohol. He swallowed pills on autopilot, not for pleasure, but to keep functioning, to get that one scene, to force that one smile, to survive. There were signs, for example, his weight changes seasonally. There were periods when he couldn't remember anything from shoots. Rehab, relapse, rehab again. And each time he smiled, that awkward smile we all recognized from Chandler, but which, with him, had long since ceased to be a joke. At his lowest point, he was on 55 Vicodin a day. His colon burst due to excessive drug use. Doctors gave him a 2% chance of survival. As a result of all this, he was in a coma for weeks. No one knew if he would make it. And yet, most of the world was still going on about his punchlines. And then the great tragedy everyone once feared happened. On October 28, 2023, Matthew Perry was found dead in his jacuzzi. He only lived to be 54 years old. The man who had saved millions with humor could no longer save himself. When his death stunned the world, another name suddenly came to mind. A face that had disappeared but once touched everyone, and then simply vanished. He was the star of the 90's. And then, he disappeared. What really happened to Brendan Fraser? It will take your breath away in disbelief. He was unstoppable, the action hero in The Mummy, the comedic powerhouse in George of the Jungle, and the darling of an entire generation. But from one day to the next, Brendan Fraser vanished from the big screen. Not because of a lack of talent, but because of something Hollywood prefers to stay silent about. This is the story of sacrifice, humiliation, and a comeback no one saw coming. In the 90's, Brendan burst in like a whirlwind. Charismatic, physical, funny. He had it all. But what no one saw, behind the scenes, the stunts were completely draining him. Broken bones, surgeries that followed year after year. And while his body was giving out, something even more painful happened. In 2003, he became the victim of inappropriate behavior. And when he spoke out about it, he was ignored, discarded, uninvited. His name disappeared from scripts and his face from the spotlight. But Brendan didn't give up. He disappeared, but not for good, because suddenly there was The Whale in 2022. He showed, in a raw and honest role, what he had been working on all those years. A 6-minute standing ovation at the Venice Film Festival showed how deeply he had been missed and appreciated. Hollywood stood up and Brendan cried. His comeback wasn't luck, it was deserved. A symbol of hope for anyone who has ever been written off. He taught us something valuable. You don't have to change to rise again. The world has to learn to see you differently. If you feel this lump in your throat, then you know why these stories must continue to be told. Like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments who you still haven't forgotten. Do you know someone who needs to hear this story? Send it to them. Maybe it will touch them the way it touched you. See you in the next video.